This is going to be one of my videos in my extended Bible series, where I delve into the Bible in detail, looking at each section and breaking down the prophecies, the visions, the stories and the accounts with what we know historically and what science has discovered for us, as well as what the Bible itself tells us. If this is the sort of video you're interested in, please like and share it with your friends. The more discussion we have, the better. Any thoughts you have, please leave in the comments. And if you're that sort of person who likes to stay up to date with things, please consider subscribing to the channel. Apart from that, I hope you enjoyed the video.
Many people would be annoyed that I covered a whole stretch of Genesis about Abraham, and yet ignored the tale of Lot and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. This is simply because Abraham is such a big character, he needed a video of his own, though he did plead for Sodom and hence saved his nephew Lot from the destruction of the city. However, whilst this is a very crucial part of Christian teaching, and certainly in some people's mind, so many people have gone over this that have all come to roughly the same conclusions and the same lessons. Yet I feel there's more to this story than many people are willing to accept. And that could quite simply be because, well, going by the conclusions I've made, it doesn't reflect well on modern Christians. So with that in mind, let's take a look at this most controversial of biblical passages by asking these three questions. What was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? What made them worth destruction? And why does this reflect badly on modern Christians? As far as what category of narrative source this section of the Bible is, I honestly don't know. It feels like an account rather than matter-of-fact layout, but the loud language and actions of the text suggests to me it's an oral story. It could also be it was written by Abraham himself, or at least by one of his scribes, since he never specified how the Lord appears to him. Despite this, I'm going to be taking a look at the language of the text as I go through. So this will go well beyond that of an oral tale, which tends to fluctuate with different interpretations. It could be a mix of the two, but I'm not sure where they will overlap. This makes it harder to question the language, but I'm going to refer to the Hebrew as much as I can so we can get a far better idea of what the Bible is trying to tell us. With that out of the way, let us begin. I suppose the best place to start is to set up the story from Abraham. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great tree of Mamre, while he was sitting in the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. Upon doing so, he hurried from the tent to meet them. The text tends to vary on what or who these people were. I'm inclined to think they were either pilgrims, simple travellers, or even wandering prophets who were pointed out to Abraham by God, so he may bid them welcome. Though I'm willing to concede later on it does suggest that they are the Lord and 2 angels. This comes into play much later on in the text, but either way, it doesn't matter who they are. Abraham was willing to give them every courtesy, gave them shelter, and offered them refreshment. And I might point out not just any refreshment either. He called for the finest flour to make the freshest loaves of bread. He took a fine, young, tender calf from his herds, prepared milk and curds, and presented all to the guests. In short, a fine fare for a weary traveller on the roads. All seems well, until later on. They said to him, "Where is your wife, Sarah?" So he said, "Here, in the tent." And one said, "I will certainly return to you in a year's time, and your wife shall have a son." This is why I think of the prophets. Whether they divine the future or the will of God isn't for me to judge, but it isn't unknown for prophets to make mad statements without prior knowledge and yet be correct. Sometimes it seems ridiculous what they say. Whilst in the last chapter, Abraham and Sarah were told they were going to be parents of nations with children matching the numbers of the stars on heaven's field. It's worth remembering they were both in their 90s at the time, well beyond childbearing age, and Sarah herself had been barren for much of her life. So such a suggestion made her laugh at herself. This did not sit well. And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Shall I surely bear a child, since I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At this time next year I will return, and Sarah shall have a son." Well, the translation says it was God who spoke to Abraham. I'm inclined to think that it was one of the prophets that spoke up, since some prophets speak in harsh tones, like when their words are questioned in an insulting manner, such as laughing. And the Lord's name is used in the 3rd person. This strongly suggests at least one of the 3 men was a prophet, if not all of them. The harsh tone is implied by the fact that Sarah not only was afraid, but lied about laughing. She was due rebuked for it. But even so, it shows how harsh the words were. It is at this point we get our first mention of Sodom. Then the men rose from where they were, and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on their way. And the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing, since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation? For I have known him in order that he may command his children and household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, do righteousness and justice." This again sounds like a prophet speaking, as though confirming what is known about their host before giving him his due reward for their hospitality. This is unknown, but ultimately he decides to tell Abraham. And the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done according to what the outcry against is that has come to me. And if not, I will know. A bit wordy, yes, but it basically means I'm getting complaints. I'm going to investigate. This is useful because he's not taking it on face value. He's going to find out. Perfectly fine. He doesn't mention what the outcry was about, but either way, on the face of it, all looks good. But Abraham takes a moment to question the Lord. Abraham said, would you destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place, and spare not the 50 righteous within? Again, this raises the question of who the men were, since, as I said before, one is presumably God speaking, and the others are possibly the angels we will come to later. If that's the case, then Abraham is questioning God's morals directly about destroying a sinful city. This is a man who God has said openly will teach his sons to do the same thing, to question him. This is not an easy thing to identify, but either way, the Lord eventually concedes that he will not destroy the city if a few, and very few, righteous are within. This is important to note for later. But now to the point many people have been waiting for. The angels in the city. The smoothness of the narrative here implies they were indeed the companions of the Lord, and therefore the same that spent lunch with Abraham. They arrived at Sodom, nearing sunset, and were met by Lot at the gate. He, as his uncle, bowed down and made them welcome. And Lot said, here now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house, and spend the night, and wash your feet. Then you may rise early, and go on your way. They said, no, but we will spend the night in the open square. But he insisted strongly. So they turned into him, and entered his house. Why they wished to spend the night in the square isn't said, but it might become plain later. They were still warmly welcomed by Lot and his household, and were well fed with what food they had. Another good host for their rest. But that rest was not going to be for long. Before they lay down, the men of the city, both young and old, from every quarter, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, saying, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, so that we may know them. This is where many translations jump the gun, as it were, in my opinion. The original Hebrew word, Wenedah, is hard to translate, and isn't done so consistently in the Bible. So for the most part, it means may know. Other translations put it as to have sex, or, in the case of the King James Version, the later version of that, it says, know them carnally, which literally means by penetration. The thing is, no context for this to mean anything but what it actually says is there. That since it's different, the term is different from the two other terms for know or knew, which were used earlier, Yade'u and Edaah, it must have some sort of twist that meant more. What that is, I don't know. If you guys happen to know Hebrew at all well, please get in touch and give me an idea of what that term actually means. Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind them, and said, Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See now, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you do with them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof. This is where things start to come together. The fourth use of know or known is different again, this time being the word Yade'u. This time the context is there, with Lot's daughters not knowing a man, and this is fairly consistent across all translations. This is where the sexual implication is unavoidable, and it's obvious the crowd outside the door are baying to get their rocks off. The only thing that is in their way is Lot, protecting his guests who are sheltered beneath his roof, by offering up his virgin daughters. One thing I found rather interesting was the literal Hebrew translation, as the phrase do as you wish with them, to mean do to them according to what is good in your eyes. This implies something different. I'm not sure what, but it's still an open invitation to bed his daughters. But this did not sit well with them. Stand aside, they said. This one came to stay here, and he keeps acting as our judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. So they pressed hard against Lot, and came near to breaking down the door. This is the case of aggressive forced entry, if ever I read one, and I read medieval fantasy. In this case, they decided that they've had enough of Lot educating them, and chose to give him the same welcome they wished upon the 2 angels within. Fortunately for Lot, the said angels acted, pulled him in, shut the door, and blinded the attackers, before turning to Lot, telling him to gather his family and loved ones and get out of the city before it's destroyed, since the outcry was far worse than they were told. Lot duly informed his sons-in-law, but like many people who hear the words of prophets, or even angels, being said by someone else, it seems unbelievable, and they don't believe him. So Lot, his wife, and his daughters fled the city, and ordered to flee to the mountains. Then the Lord rained fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah, for the Lord out of heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. All divine and mighty, yes, but this got me thinking. Could this be explained by a natural phenomenon? It sounds similar to a meteor strike, or possibly a volcanic eruption. So it made me look at the geology of the Jordan River. And I was quite surprised at what I found. It turns out the Jordan River runs in a rift valley caused by the separation of the African and Arabian plates, similar to the Great African Rift Valley. And the area where the cities were believed to be are on the borders of the Dead Sea, well below sea level. What I found was most exciting. That archaeologists found not only evidence of burned cities in that area, but also deposits of bitumen, petroleum, natural gas, and sulfur in the area. All incredibly flammable substances. The sulfur, that is brimstone, mixed with hydrogen, you get that smell. An earthquake, which would have been quite frequent in the area, could have shaken these loose, caused them to ignite, and in short, produce the effects that were seen many miles away by Abraham. And furthermore, producing an action that is worthy of God. Okay, geology geek out over. Time to review what we've learned with the questions in mind. So what was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? The thing we have to remember is Gomorrah is hardly mentioned at all in the story. And the angels only mention Sodom and the outcry against it. So, what about Sodom? I think the context of the story needs to be taken into account, and I mean the whole story. Because if you take time to read it, you see it's not just thrown in out of the blue, like I originally thought it was. It starts off with Abraham seeing 3 men and making them welcome. The text uses 4 different words for men throughout that section, but all translations are the same. Though it is implied that the 2 are the angels that went to Sodom, and the 3rd is God himself. Note the word for angel, Hamaleakhim, is similar but noticeably different from all words for man. I'll try to remember to link them below. Whilst Sarah raised their ire by laughing at their suggestion of her having children, Abraham openly questioned God about his morals and compassion with the righteousness in a city of sinners. Soon after, the angels were only prevented from sleeping in the square by Lot insisting they shelter under his roof. This could well have saved them from the aggressive advances from the men of Sodom. One more thing stands out here, because Lot asks the men not to attack his guests who are under his roof. That phrasing turns up in a few places, but ultimately those who live with him in his household, those he invited in. This, and to the fact that the men saw Lot as an outsider and planned to do him one, implies to me at least that the sin of Sodom was the willful harming of guests who sought shelter, the violation of a sanctuary. One could also add the failure to identify the angels for whom they were, but this is still compounded by the fact they would treat them like any other and demand sexual relations with them without consent. rape in any form, to anyone, isn't the mark of a good host, compared to what Abraham and Lot did for their guests, which was provide them with the finest food and shelter that they could offer. What made them worthy of destruction? I covered the main reasons God isn't a fan of homosexual copulation in a previous video that I will link in the cards, if I remember. In short, it's to prevent the unnecessary spread of sexually transmitted diseases. The fact that the men of Sodom were not only looking for sexual relations with the new men of the town, demanding it, by Neve breaking down the door, doesn't just imply a high likelihood of transmission, but the intent of rape, which is well known to be damaging to people both physically and mentally. This wasn't a city of homosexuals, but a city of rapists who didn't care who they harmed. Since I've heard many rational parents say that child molesters should be given the death penalty, God causing an earthquake to claim the city full of them is well within moral justification. It's worth remembering that God didn't take someone's word for it, but sent his angels to investigate, find out the truth, and make sure that the righteous people, like Lot and his family, were out of the way before the city was razed to the ground. So why does it reflect badly on modern Christians? I could do a whole video on this alone, but I'll limit myself here. Most people, when they read the passage, see a clear sign of God's hatred for homosexuality, and that take gets used almost exclusively to the point only those who are investigating the facts of the city's existence look at it in another way, by focusing on an implied homosexual intent against the obvious rape intentions. We blind ourselves to the true horrors of the tale, and we learn why God hated them so much. Furthermore, taking out of context is what makes us forget what it means, because we focus on vague extrapolation. We feel scoff at the idea of it being about guest rights or hospitality, but this makes it worse, especially as some pagan cultures take guest rights very seriously. The Greek goddess Hestia is the goddess of the hearth, a sign of safety, comfort, and peace. Even the Roman equivalent, Vesta, is a symbol of the home, a family, all signs of hospitality. Keep the Home Fires Burning was a very popular wartime song in Britain, showing how important a home is for safety and comfort, even in a very Christian time. And if you want to go back to a pagan culture, even the Vikings, a culture feared by Christians, had such a strong tradition of guest rights that even their most violent deities, such as the Yade'u, are never mentioned in legend to openly break guest rights. They find all manner of twisty ways around it, but they refuse to break it directly. That shows how strong it is. When we remember that the men of Sodom took Lot's strangeness their town as an excuse to attack him as well, we can start to see the more vindictive Christian homes are more akin to the homes of Sodom than the household of Abraham. Anything that can be picked on to divide us, even if it's just a strange person to your cultures, is more akin to Sodom than any Christian would like to admit. And anything that doesn't meet our norms is seen as wrong by us. It just happens. And that's far more sodomite than any son of Abraham has any right to believe. One more thing to bear in mind is that the men of the city were of all ages, both young and old. This implies women would have been living in the city as well, though most likely they wouldn't have been out and about like the men at that hour. A very misogynistic implication, but still. Therefore the men wouldn't have been interested in their own gender to the exclusion of the fairer sex. This ignorance blinds us to the suffering we are causing people. If we are the superior culture, worshipping what we call the one true God, we should be able to see all the aspects of love and inclusiveness in the Bible, rather than fixate on a couple of things that are only vaguely mentioned, that we blow out of all proportion. And ignore the rest. We would do very well to remember that God is all-knowing, and that implies He knows far more than anyone can ever comprehend. So to sum up, this is a topic of extreme controversy. Changing the status quo puts people on edge, but if one takes the time to look at the story as a whole, rather than the lone point that gets blown out of all proportion, you start to understand far more about not only God's will for us, but also the people in the Bible, and us as people who want to know God. If you take nothing else from this video, then remember this: if your doors are not open, no one can come into the church. If no one comes into the church, then the church is going to be empty.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like, share and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching, and God bless.